The bright lights of the America's Got Talent stage illuminated the entire theater as a small Filipino family stepped forward from backstage, their movements gentle but filled with a mixture of nervousness and pride. From Cebu City, they had traveled far, across oceans, airports, delays, and doubts, all for this single moment. At the front was Aling Maritz, a kind-faced woman in her late 40s whose hands still trembled slightly from the long flight. Beside her stood her teenage son Jiro, thin but bright-eyed, carrying the decorated wooden basket where the real stars of the show were resting, the Savitsky performers, a group of beautifully trained Philippine cats known in their barangay for doing tricks no one believed a cat would ever do. As they walked toward the center of the stage, the audience leaned forward, curious. It was rare to see cats on AGT, especially in a large group, and even rarer to see them as calm as the little ears poking out of the basket Jiro carried. The wooden basket itself was painted with traditional Cebuano patterns, bright reds, blues, and yellows swirling across the woven material, complete with tiny hand-painted flowers that Maritz had added the night before they traveled. A faint meow echoed inside, causing the audience to laugh softly. Simon Cowell raised one eyebrow, his signature skeptical expression appearing immediately. He crossed his arms and leaned back in his chair as he studied the family on stage. He had seen many animal acts before, and most of them ended in chaos, especially the ones with cats. The thought alone seemed to amuse him. Beside him, Sofia Vergara leaned forward, smiling warmly at the family's shy but proud entrance. Heidi Klum waved at them, encouraging them with her bright, friendly energy. Howie Mandel tapped his fingers on the table, already curious about what this Filipino act would bring. The host, Terry Crews, stepped forward with his usual warmth and booming charisma. "Welcome to America's Got Talent," he said, beaming. "What are your names and where did you come from?" Jiro held the microphone with both hands, bowing slightly as he spoke. "Good evening, hello everyone. I'm Jiro, and this is my mother, Maritz." He took a breath, clearly trying not to let the size of the theater overwhelm him. "We came all the way from Cebu City, Philippines." The audience cheered loudly at the mention of the Philippines, and someone from the crowd shouted, "Mabuhay." Jiro smiled shyly, and even Aling Maritz couldn't help but laugh softly, her nerves easing just a little. "And who, or what," Terry said jokingly, pointing at the basket, "do we have in here?" Jiro lifted the lid slightly, and two tiny cat heads popped out, blinking at the bright stage lights. The crowd erupted into giggles and applause. One of the cats, a tiny orange tabby named Pewty, meowed confidently, as though used to large crowds. Another cat, a white and gray mix named Tala, stretched her neck gracefully, her eyes scanning the judges. "These are our cats," Jiro said proudly. "We call them the Savitsky performers." The name alone made Howie laugh. "You mean like the famous Savitsky cats from Ukraine?" he asked. Jiro nodded. "Yes, sir. We were inspired by them. But we trained ours using only love, patience, and sardines." The entire theater burst into laughter, including Simon, who actually let out a quick, surprised chuckle. "Well," Simon said, adjusting his microphone, "cats don't usually do what you tell them to do. They do whatever they want. So this," he gestured toward the basket, "is going to be very interesting." Jiro exchanged a quick glance with his mother, who whispered, "Kaya mo, yen, anak," just loud enough for him to hear. With a deep breath, he placed the basket gently on the floor. One by one, the cats climbed out, moving gracefully, almost like performers stepping onto a grand stage. The audience reacted with coos and surprised applause as the cats lined up neatly, all without anyone touching them. Simon's eyes widened, but his expression remained guarded. The lights dimmed slightly. The music cue signaled the beginning of something unexpected. And for a brief moment, the entire theater fell into a curious silence, every pair of eyes fixed on the small Filipino family from Cebu City and their extraordinary feline performers who were about to attempt something that many believed impossible. The moment the stage lights shifted and the soft upbeat music began, something magical happened. The cats, who had been sitting calmly like disciplined students waiting for a teacher's signal, suddenly came alive with sharp attention. Jiro knelt down gently and tapped the stage floor twice, a sound barely audible to the audience but impossibly clear to the trained ears of the Savitsky performers. In an instant, the first cat, Tala, stepped forward, her tiny paws barely making a sound on the polished AGT stage. The audience gasped as Jiro pointed toward a miniature bamboo hoop suspended by a thin, nearly invisible fishing line. The hoop wasn't ordinary. It was wrapped in tiny strips of woven banig, giving it a unique Filipino texture. Under the bright lights, its details shimmered like artwork. Tala took a graceful step back, preparing herself for the jump. The crowd watched with the kind of anticipation normally reserved for Olympic gymnasts. Even Simon leaned forward a little, though he tried to hide the widening curiosity in his eyes. Tala sprinted forward and leapt through the hoop with such elegance and precision that the audience burst into applause. She landed softly on her feet, tail up, eyes sharp as if saying, "That was just the beginning." Immediately after, a second cat, the chubbier gray and white one named Nini, trotted toward a narrow beam elevated a foot above the ground. But this beam was more than a prop, it was designed to mimic the slanted roof of a bahay-kubo. Tiny palm-like lines were painted across it, giving it an almost nostalgic charm that made Filipino viewers in the audience whisper excitedly. Nini paused at the start of the beam, her whiskers twitching, then placed one paw forward. She began walking across the beam with such incredible balance that the judges all sat up straight. "How is this happening?" Heidi whispered, stunned. Cats were known for grace, yes, but they were equally known for unpredictability. Yet here was Nini, walking with the poise of a trained ballerina, reaching the end without a single wobble. When she stepped down, the audience erupted once more. The next act came from Beauty, the small orange tabby with bright, mischievous eyes. Jiro whistled softly, and Beauty responded with a cheerful meow before darting toward a miniature kariton, a tiny handcrafted cart with miniature wheels. The craftsmanship was so good that even Simon squinted, trying to understand how such detail was possible. Beauty placed his front paws on the small handlebar and began pushing the kariton across the stage in a perfectly straight line. People rose from their seats in disbelief. They laughed, clapped, and shouted as Beauty marched forward proudly like a street vendor pushing his cart down a Filipino alley. Sophia clapped her hands repeatedly, smiling from ear to ear. Howie leaned back, his laughter echoing through the theater. Even Simon couldn't hide the small smile forming at the corner of his lips. But the biggest shock came when the smallest cat, Munting, barely bigger than a coconut, trotted toward a mini bamboo ladder. The crowd fell silent again. The ladder was only about 3 feet tall, but it towered over the tiny cat. Jiro made a small clicking sound with his tongue, and Munting looked up as though understanding perfectly. Slowly, with complete discipline, she lifted herself step by step, her claws gently gripping the bamboo as she climbed upward. As she reached the top, the spotlight hit her just right, making the moment look almost cinematic. The entire theater roared with cheers as the tiny cat stood there triumphantly, tail flicking like a proud flag. But the grand moment was yet to come. Behind the cats was a platform shaped like the iconic Magellan's Cross monument. Jiro tapped the floor again, and all 4 cats moved into synchronized positions. Tala leapt onto the top platform, Nini circled around and climbed the side steps, Beauty pushed his kariton beside it like part of the choreography, Munting perched proudly beside the cross-shaped structure. Together, they formed a breathtaking tableau that looked both surprising and deeply Filipino. The judges stared in awe. Simon, now fully leaning forward, covered his mouth slightly with his hand. Not out of judgment, but astonishment. "I've never," he whispered loud enough for his mic to catch it, "seen cats do this. I mean, ever." The crowd stood in a thunderous standing ovation, their cheers shaking the theater. The music ended, and the cats, as if perfectly trained for a curtain call, lined up in front of Jiro and performed a tiny synchronized bow. The applause grew even louder, some audience members even tearing up from the sheer joy and disbelief of the moment. The applause was still echoing through the massive theater when Jiro gently gathered his cats, letting them rest on the small mat he had brought from Cebu. Their tiny bodies rose and fell with calm breaths, completely unbothered by the thousands of eyes fixed on them. The audience continued clapping, some even whistling, others shouting, "Philippines," and "Bravo." The judges exchanged stunned looks, each one trying to process what they had just witnessed. Even the stage crew backstage had stepped closer, peeking past the curtains to see the unbelievable sight of cats acting like world-class performers. Simon Cowell, who moments earlier had been leaning so far forward that his elbows almost touched the table, now stood up completely. He didn't wait for the applause to die down. He simply lifted himself from the judge's chair, straightened his shirt, and looked directly at Jiro with a mix of awe, admiration, and pure disbelief. The crowd noticed his reaction immediately and roared louder, knowing how rare it was for Simon to be this impressed. Jiro swallowed hard, unsure if this was a good sign or a bad one. His mother, Maritz, placed her hand softly on his shoulder and whispered, "Anak, tingnan mo, tumayo si Simon. Ibig sabihin maganda yun." The boy nodded, though his feet remained glued to the stage floor. The moment felt unreal. For a second, he wondered if he was still dreaming on the airplane, imagining performing on AGT. But no, this was real. The lights, the energy, the thousands of cheering strangers, all of it alive and surrounding him. When the applause finally softened, Simon leaned toward his microphone. There was a brief silence, the kind that feels heavy and full of promise. He took a breath and said, "Okay, let me be extremely honest." The entire theater froze. Even the cats, as if sensing the tension, lifted their heads. "When you walked on stage," Simon began, "I thought this was going to be a complete disaster." The audience laughed, and Simon raised his hand slightly to clarify. "I mean it. Cats are not performers. They don't listen. They don't follow directions. They do whatever they want. I've always said on this show, if someone brings a cat on stage, prepare for chaos." Sophia covered her mouth, laughing as she nodded in agreement. But what happened here, Simon continued, his voice warming, was the complete opposite. This was extraordinary. Jiro's breath caught. Maritz blinked rapidly, holding back tears. Simon pointed at the cats. "These little stars behaved better than some of the humans who audition here. I don't know how you trained them. I don't know how you convinced them to work together like that. I don't know how you got them to bow. Cats don't bow." The audience laughed again. "But I do know one thing," Simon said. His voice softened. "This is one of the best animal acts we have ever seen on AGT. And I mean ever." Maritz gasped. Jiro's hand flew to his mouth. A few people in the audience screamed out of excitement. Simon wasn't done. "You didn't just bring a performance," he said slowly. "You brought culture. You brought heart. You brought a piece of the Philippines to the AGT stage. And you made all of us fall in love with your story and with your amazing cats." The crowd erupted again, clapping and cheering louder than before. Then Simon lifted his hand dramatically over the buzzer. The entire theater screamed. Even Jiro instinctively took a step forward, his heart pounding in his chest. "I'm not giving you a yes," Simon said, pausing just long enough for everyone to gasp. "I'm giving you a huge, massive, absolute yes." He slammed the buzzer with such force that the sound echoed like a victory bell. The lights flashed, the audience jumped to their feet, and confetti cannons fired from the sides of the stage. Jiro let out a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. Maritz hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her cheeks, her voice shaking as she said, "Ginawa mo, anak. Ginawa mo talaga." Sophia gave her yes with excitement, saying she adored the Filipino charm and the adorable cats. Heidi said it was magical and unlike anything she had ever seen. Howie, still laughing in disbelief, said, "If cats could teach classes, I'd enroll." This is a yes. Backstage, the AGT crew clapped as Jiro and Maritz walked off with their cats, overwhelmed with joy. People shouted, "Philippines," and "Cebu," as they passed. Jiro looked down at his cats, tired, calm, innocent, and whispered, "Salamat. We did it." The stage lights glowed behind them as the door closed, marking the beginning of a new chapter none of them had ever imagined.